At 30,000 feet, a desperate whisper pierces the silence. Help me. Then suddenly, all the lights vanish. Trapped in darkness, fear takes hold as the passengers face a nightmare unlike any other. This is a story of survival, mystery, and hope that will keep you hooked until the very end. Before we start, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your location and thoughts in the comments below. Now, let's jump right into the story. The hum of the engines was the only constant in the silence of the red-eye flight from New York to London, a low mechanical whisper that blended with the occasional cough, the rustle of a blanket, or the ding of a seatbelt sign. Cabin lights were dimmed to a soft glow, casting long shadows across slumbering passengers. Outside the small, oval windows, the sky was an endless blanket of black. 30,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, the world below had vanished, swallowed by darkness. Sarah Blake sat rigid in her seat, her knuckles white from gripping the armrests. Flying always unnerved her, but this flight felt particularly claustrophobic. She had taken 2 sleeping pills and still couldn't drift off. Her heart beat with an anxious rhythm that no amount of lavender oil or breathing exercises could calm. Maybe it was the way the air smelled, stale, synthetic, like it hadn't been refreshed in hours. Or maybe it was the man sitting next to her. He hadn't said a single word since boarding. Late 20s, pale skin with a grayish undertone, eyes that stayed downcast as though afraid of eye contact. He wore a hoodie with the drawstring pulled tight, covering half his face, and his hands trembled ever so slightly as he clutched the seatbelt. There was something about him that didn't sit right. Maybe it was just her nerves playing tricks, but she had learned long ago to trust her instincts. And right now they were screaming. Sarah pulled her travel blanket tighter around her and turned to glance at him again. He hadn't moved, just stared straight ahead, breathing shallowly. She debated whether to speak to him, ask if he was okay. But just as she opened her mouth, he slowly turned toward her. His eyes, wide and hollow, locked onto hers. Lips parted. Then, in the faintest voice, barely audible over the drone of the engines, he whispered, "Help me." Her spine stiffened. What? But he didn't repeat himself. His eyes rolled back slightly, and he slumped deeper into his seat, as if drained. She turned fully toward him, alarmed. "Hey, are you all right?" she asked, louder now, but before she could touch his shoulder. Everything went black. The lights overhead blinked out in an instant. The TV screens froze, then vanished. The engine hum seemed to mute for a moment, as though the entire plane had been swallowed by a void. Gasps echoed through the cabin. Someone screamed. Somewhere a baby wailed. The emergency lights, the ones that were supposed to flash red along the floor panels, never came on. There was nothing. Just darkness. Just silence. Just fear. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes darted around, but she could see nothing. She reached into the seat pocket in front of her, fumbling for her phone, her fingers trembling. She clicked the power button. The screen didn't turn on. Dead. She checked the overhead lights again. Still nothing. It wasn't just a power flicker. It was total failure. A cold realization crept in her chest. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The man next to her remained still, unmoving, his head against the window, breath fogging up the glass. She leaned closer, staring at his silhouette. "Hey," she whispered urgently, shaking his shoulder. No response. Panic surged through her. She looked around the pitch-black cabin. Some passengers had started shouting. Others whispered prayers or tried to reach for the call buttons above their heads, which no longer worked. Flight attendants, barely visible shadows with flickering flashlights, rushed through the aisles trying to restore calm. And in the midst of it all, Sarah sat frozen beside the man who had whispered, "Help me," seconds before the entire plane had seemingly lost its soul. High above the world, in a tin can of silence and darkness, Sarah realized this was no ordinary flight, and the nightmare was only beginning. The darkness was thick, almost alive, curling through the cabin like invisible smoke. Sarah's pulse thundered in her ears as she strained to see anything, any sign of light, motion, or reason. People were stirring all around her now. Confused murmurs had turned into frightened voices. A woman across the aisle was crying. A man behind her shouted for a flight attendant. But no one had answers. The darkness was total. It felt unnatural, as if the plane had fallen out of reality itself. She reached again for her phone, tapping the power button over and over. Still dead. She tried the reading light overhead. No response. She unbuckled her seatbelt with shaky hands and half stood in the aisle. Her knees wobbled. She clutched the headrest in front of her to stay balanced. "Is anyone else's phone working?" she asked, her voice louder than she expected in the suffocating silence. A few people murmured no. One man said his battery had been full minutes ago, and now it wouldn't even power on. Someone suggested an EMP, a pulse that knocked out electronics. Another claimed they were flying through some kind of electrical storm, but there had been no turbulence, no warning. Suddenly, a beam of light sliced through the black. One of the flight attendants, somewhere near the middle of the cabin, holding a weak flashlight that barely lit a 2-foot radius. She moved cautiously, her voice tight and strained. "Everyone, please remain calm. We're experiencing a technical malfunction. We're working to restore systems. Please stay in your seats." But her tone betrayed her. Sarah could hear it. The tightness. The fear. Another light flicked on, this one closer. A second attendant was walking up the aisle, waving the beam left and right like she was searching for something or someone. Sarah turned back toward the man in the hoodie. Still motionless. She leaned close, whispering again. "Sir, can you hear me?" She touched his arm gently. Ice cold. His head lolled slightly, and she recoiled. Something was wrong. He wasn't asleep, and he wasn't just scared. She looked around frantically. The second flight attendant's flashlight washed over her for a moment, and she raised a hand. "Excuse me. This man needs help. He asked me for help before the lights went out." The attendant stepped closer, light flickering as she approached. She shined the beam directly on the man's face. His skin looked pale, waxy, almost bluish. His lips were parted slightly, but he didn't blink. He didn't move. She knelt beside him and pressed 2 fingers to his neck. Her eyes widened. "What is it?" Sarah whispered. The attendant didn't answer. She leaned in closer, shook the man's shoulder, then stood quickly and turned to the front of the plane. "I need a med kit here," she called, louder now, urgency sharpening her voice. Possible medical emergency. People in nearby seats sat up straighter. Heads turned. Someone asked if they should land. Another cried out, "Is he dead?" Sarah's heart raced faster than it ever had before. She wanted to believe this was just an isolated medical emergency, nothing more. But the timing, the whisper, the total shutdown, something larger was happening here. The first flight attendant returned, speaking into a crackling intercom that barely worked. "Ladies and gentlemen, please stay seated. We are working to reroute power and communicate with the flight deck. We will update you as soon as possible." But there was no announcement from the captain, no pilot voice, no reassurance from the cockpit, and that silence spoke volumes. Sarah looked again at the man beside her, his lifeless posture, the cold sweat on his brow, and most of all, the final thing he said before everything plunged into darkness. "Help me." Suddenly, the entire plane jolted, just slightly, but enough to make Sarah grab the armrest. Then came the sound of something slamming from the cargo hold below. Or was it inside the walls? People were starting to scream now. The second jolt was stronger. Overhead bins rattled. A glass fell somewhere in the dark, shattering against the aisle floor. Sarah gripped the armrest, her eyes darting toward the ceiling as muffled thuds echoed from below, somewhere near the undercarriage or cargo hold. It didn't sound mechanical. It sounded alive. The cabin had turned into chaos. A child cried out behind her, and his mother tried to soothe him with trembling words. Across the aisle, 2 teenagers were frantically trying to turn on a tablet, but it remained dark. The usual comforting presence of the flight attendants had dissolved. The woman who had checked the man next to Sarah had disappeared down the aisle minutes ago and hadn't come back. The other 2, nowhere to be seen. No flashlights, no calming announcements. Just the passengers and the dark. Sarah stood again, steadying herself as the plane seemed to list gently to the left. "Hello," she called toward the front galley. "Is anyone up there?" No answer. She took a step forward, her fingers trailing the backs of seats as she moved up the aisle. Others watched her, their faces ghostly in the shadows. Someone should check the cockpit, a man muttered behind her. Why haven't we heard from the captain? She stopped just before the curtain that separated economy from business class. It was partially drawn, fluttering gently. The small galley area where attendants usually stood to prepare drinks and meals was empty. No carts, no flight crew. "Hello," she called again, louder this time. Still no answer. Then, a strange silence settled over the cabin. Not the natural quiet of night, but something heavier, expectant, thick, as if the plane itself were holding its breath. Sarah reached for the curtain and pulled it aside. What she saw made her blood run cold. The business class cabin was completely empty. Every seat unoccupied. No passengers. No crew. No sign anyone had been there at all. A half-drunk glass of wine sat on a tray table. A blanket still held the indent of where someone had been curled moments ago. But there were no people. Not one. Sarah turned back toward the economy section. "They're gone," she shouted. "The flight crew, they're not here." Gasps erupted from the passengers. Someone called out, "What do you mean gone?" "Like left. They vanished." Sarah said, "The business class is empty. No one's there." A murmur rippled through the cabin like a rising tide of dread. Suddenly, a voice crackled through the speaker system, garbled, broken, like it was being dragged through water. "This is not normal. Stay in your seats." Then silence. Sarah rushed back to her row and leaned over the lifeless man in the hoodie. Her hand shook as she searched his jacket pocket, desperate to find some ID, a phone, anything. She pulled out a boarding pass and squinted in the dim light from the emergency exit sign, flickering faintly in the distance. Elias Warren. That was his name. She had no idea why, but knowing it made the situation feel eerily more personal. A shout came from the rear of the plane. "Bathroom doors are locked. We can't open them." More voices joined in, reporting other strange occurrences. Seatbelt lights flickering on despite no power, window shades rattling on their own, overhead vents blowing bursts of freezing air. Then, the plane tilted slightly again. Not a sharp dive or climb, just a gentle, unnatural lean that didn't correct itself, as if the autopilot had disengaged and the aircraft was drifting. Sarah's eyes locked with a young man across the aisle. His face was pale. "You think they jumped?" he asked in a trembling whisper. "No," she replied. "They didn't jump. They disappeared." No one could explain how an entire section of people could vanish mid-flight. No turbulence. No doors open. No screams. No struggle. Just silence. And the growing feeling that something was inside the plane with them, watching. Just as Sarah was about to slide the boarding pass back into the man's hoodie, his fingers twitched. So small a movement, it could have been imagined, except she felt it. She gasped and stepped back, clutching the headrest for support. "He moved," she shouted, her voice cracking in disbelief. Heads turned again, but no one spoke. The fear was too deep now, like a blanket pressed over everyone's mouths. Sarah leaned closer, heart pounding in her chest like a drum. "Elias?" she said softly, trying to name on her tongue. His lips parted slightly. For a moment, he didn't breathe. Then, with a sudden gasp, his chest rose. A ragged, sharp inhale, like someone dragged from underwater at the last possible second. His eyes snapped open. They weren't normal. Not glowing, not monstrous, but vacant. As if he were seeing straight through her, or not seeing her at all. His pupils were pinpoints in a sea of storm-gray irises, like fogged-over glass. His mouth moved, trembling, trying to form words. But only one sound came out, barely above a whisper. "Don't." Sarah gripped his wrist, panic rushing through her. "Don't what?" "Elias, what happened to you?" His jaw clenched. He closed his eyes for a second, then opened them again, this time more focused. His breath came fast and shallow. "It's inside," he said, voice hoarse and broken. "It waits behind the noise." "What does?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted the answer. "Darkness," he rasped. "Not just light failure. It feeds." Before Sarah could ask more, Elias's body tensed. His hands seized the armrests, knuckles whitening. His eyes darted around, as if following something invisible through the air. "Don't let it see you," he whispered, this time urgent. "When it chooses, you vanish. No pain. Just gone." Sarah backed away slightly, her mind spinning. Had he lost his mind? Or had he seen something the rest of them hadn't? Another scream erupted from the back of the plane. Everyone jumped. A woman near the rear galley stood up, her hands clapped over her mouth, eyes wide in horror. "My husband was right next to me," she cried. "He was right here, and now he's not." The plane had grown colder. Not the usual chill of cabin AC, but a deeper cold. One that crept into your bones and made your breath fog in front of your face. Sarah glanced at the vents above. Still dead. No power. No airflow. So why the cold? Elias turned his head slowly toward her. "You have to stay in motion," he said. "It hunts stillness. Fear. Isolation." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "If you stop moving too long, if you get separated," he trailed off, eyes drifting toward the cockpit. They were the first. The pilots. Then the crew. "It starts at the front." Sarah wanted to deny it, but his words fit. The captain hadn't made a single announcement. The business class passengers were gone. The crew had vanished. And now someone else, just sitting in their seat, had disappeared too. Elias gripped her hand, surprising her with unexpected strength. "It's still learning," he said. "Still testing us. But soon it won't need to test." She stared into his eyes, suddenly struck by a realization. He wasn't afraid of death. He was afraid of something much worse. She looked around the cabin again. The other passengers were trying to comfort each other, whispering prayers or theories or desperate explanations. But she could feel it, the dread, the presence. The air itself vibrated with it, like something unseen was moving among them. And for one chilling second, Sarah thought she saw the air shimmer, just beside an empty seat. The shimmering in the air vanished before Sarah could truly register it, like heat haze on asphalt blinking out of existence. She stood frozen, heart pounding, her hands still locked with Elias's. Around them, the passengers were on the verge of full panic now. Whispers had become arguments. Fear had turned into desperation. "We need answers," a burly man from row 19 shouted, stepping into the aisle. His voice cracked slightly, betraying his own fear. "What the hell is going on here?" A woman, older, in her 60s, clutched a rosary and murmured prayers in Spanish. Another man tried desperately to get his phone to work again. Nothing. No signal. No battery. All devices remained dead. And the emergency lighting along the aisles, the faint strips that should have lit up, were flickering with no rhythm, like they were glitching. Sarah looked at Elias. "You said hunts fear," she said. "Stillness. Isolation." He nodded weakly. "Then we need to stick together," she said loudly, turning toward the others. "Everyone, we have to move into the center section. No one stays alone. Don't stay in the back. Don't go up front. Group together." Most people just stared at her, unsure, but the mother with the crying baby stood first. "She's right. I'm not staying here alone." The others began to stir, gathering what little courage they could muster. They slid into the center rows, squeezing together. The man from row 19 helped a teenage girl move her suitcase from an aisle, creating space. Within minutes, the passengers had all huddled together. Rows 15 through 21 now, full, bodies pressed close, strangers holding hands. The idea was ridiculous, surreal, but it gave them a purpose: stay united. Sarah turned to Elias. "Why didn't it take you?" "I don't know," he replied hoarsely. "Maybe I was already fading. Maybe I wasn't fully here for it to grab. But I heard it, felt it. It doesn't kill, it consumes something else." He glanced toward the cockpit again. Whatever's at the front, that's where it started. The man from earlier, row 19, spoke again. "Someone has to go up front. We need to see if we can get in the cockpit." "No," Elias barked. "Don't. That's exactly what it wants." But the man was already pushing forward. "I was in the Air Force," he snapped. "If our pilots are incapacitated, someone needs to fly this thing. You want to die sitting in the dark, waiting for this thing to eat you?" He didn't wait for an answer. He moved forward, determined, hands gripping seat back for balance. Sarah watched him push past the curtain and disappear. Seconds ticked by. Then a full minute. "Sir," someone called. No response. Sarah looked at Elias. "Do you think?" Before she could finish, there was a sound. A deep, low groan, like metal being bent. It reverberated through the floor. Then a scream. Brief. Cut off like a switch being flipped. Then silence. The passengers fell into stunned quiet. Sarah clutched Elias's arm. She could feel his breath catch in his throat. "It got him," he whispered. The plane gave a small lurch, as if shifting balance. Someone sobbed. The child cried again. Then a row of overhead lights in the center section flickered on, just for a moment, and every passenger looked up, because the light revealed something in the aisle. Footprints. Wet, black, and steaming slightly against the cold floor. But no body, no man, just the path of his final steps, and then nothing. Elias trembled beside her. "It's not just inside the plane," he murmured. "It's inside us now." Sarah stared at the prints, at the emptiness ahead. Then she did the only thing she could. She stood up and took a deep breath. "We're going to survive this," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "We just have to keep moving. Stay awake. Stay together. Because whatever was hunting them, whatever had taken control of the plane, it was far from finished. And it was getting closer." The cabin was silent again, save for the soft sniffles of terrified passengers and the intermittent whimpering of the child. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the overhead bins, as if cast by a light source that didn't exist. Sarah sat rigid in her seat, her body tense and her ears tuned for any sign of motion, any whisper of sound. Beside her, Elias had grown quiet, his eyes half-lidded, body trembling from fatigue or fear, or both. Then, from the rear of the plane, came a crackle, a faint, scratchy burst of noise. Everyone turned toward the source. It was coming from the intercom system. A tiny red light blinked on near the speaker panel above the galley. For the first time since the plane went dark, something powered up. Sarah stood slowly, heart thudding against her ribs. The passengers watched her as she walked cautiously toward the galley, the static growing louder with each step. As she reached the intercom panel, the speaker emitted a high-pitched squeal, followed by a voice. It wasn't the pilot's voice. It wasn't a flight attendant. It was distorted, choked with static, but unmistakably human. "They're not real. Listen, don't listen." Sarah froze. "Hello," she said, pressing the button near the speaker. "Who is this? Can you hear me?" More crackling. The voice returned, closer now, though still fragmented. "Flight 79, lost, nowhere, not sky, not Earth." "What do you mean? Where are we?" she demanded. Then the voice rose, panicked. "Don't let it see your thoughts. It listens. It watches inside." A pop of white noise blared so loud it made her wince and step back. The speaker cut out. The red light blinked off. Sarah turned to the others. "Someone was trying to warn us. I think we're not where we're supposed to be." "No kidding," said a pale, trembling teenager near the center. "We're in hell." Elias coughed and shifted. "The message. I've heard something like it. Not words, but impressions. Like someone whispering behind glass." Sarah helped him sit upright. "Do you think we're in another dimension?" "I don't know," Elias said. "But the moment we crossed into this space, the rules changed. Sound bends. Light fails. Time slips." Sarah thought about the passenger who vanished beside his wife. The man who went toward the cockpit and never came back. The shimmering air. The footprints. "This isn't just a malfunction," she said, her voice flat. "Something is playing with us." Then came another sound, this one from beneath the floorboards. A dragging noise, slow, deliberate, like something heavy being pulled across metal. Passengers clutched one another. Sarah moved instinctively between them and the aisle. The dragging grew louder, then stopped. One of the overhead compartments near row 18 creaked open slowly, though no one was near it. A tattered airline blanket drifted down and landed on a seat, folding in on itself like something had been holding it, then let go. Whispers filled the air. Not words, just breath. Dozens of overlapping gasps surrounding them. Sarah turned to Elias. "If it feeds on fear and isolation, then this is all part of the game. It's trying to break us." He nodded. "It's testing limits. And those messages, They're either warnings from someone else who's been here or echoes of people it already took. Sarah knew what had to be done. If the intercom's working, maybe something else is too. We need to reach the cockpit, not just to fly this thing, but to send out a message. A real one, before we disappear completely. But what if that's exactly what it wants? Someone asked. Sarah's jaw clenched. Then we make sure we go together. No one alone. No one still. If it's watching, let's make sure it sees strength, not fear. And as the lights flickered again and the shadows shifted unnaturally overhead, she stepped toward the front of the plane, not because she wasn't afraid, but because she knew whatever came next, they couldn't face it in the dark. Not divided, not silent. The aisle stretched ahead like a tunnel into the unknown. Sarah took the first step forward, her shoes making soft thuds on the carpeted floor. Behind her, Elias limped slightly, tried to keep up, one arm pressed tightly against his ribs. The rest of the passengers watched them go, their expressions a mixture of hope and horror. No one offered to follow. As they moved closer to the front of the plane, the air grew noticeably colder. Sarah could feel it prickling against her skin, raising goosebumps along her arms. The lights flickered more violently now, casting their shadows in jerky, stuttering bursts. It felt like the plane was holding its breath. The curtain that separated the cabin from the first-class section was drawn shut again, though Sarah was certain it had been pushed aside earlier when the man from row 19 had gone through. She paused in front of it. Elias reached out, grabbing the fabric. "Ready?" he whispered. She nodded. He pulled it open slowly. The first-class section was completely empty. The seats, though wider and more comfortable looking, were eerily pristine, untouched. Not a single bag or item left behind. No sound, not even the hum of air circulating through the vents. Just silence and stillness. And at the far end of the section, the cockpit door, sealed shut. They walked forward. Sarah tried not to look too long at the vacant chairs. Something about them felt wrong, like they were recently occupied, but their owners had simply vanished mid-conversation. When they reached the cockpit, Sarah knocked on the door. Hard. "Captain," she called. "Can you hear me? Please, we need help. We're trapped back here." No answer. She knocked again, more urgently. "We have people panicking. Some have disappeared. If you can hear me, open the door." Nothing. Elias leaned in, listening. "Something's moving in there," he whispered. Sarah pressed her ear against the cold metal. There was indeed a faint sound, barely audible. A sort of scratching, no, tapping, like fingers brushing lightly against the inside of the door. But no voice, no human movement. She reached for the emergency cockpit access panel, something she remembered reading about once on a travel blog. But when she lifted the small latch near the bottom of the wall, the keypad beneath it had no power. The numbers didn't light up. The override system was dead. "It's locked," she said. "It's watching us," Elias murmured. Sarah turned to him. "What do you mean?" Elias pointed to the tiny lens above the cockpit door, a surveillance camera used by the pilots to view the cabin. Its red light was blinking steadily now, the only light that hadn't flickered or failed. "It's recording," he said. "Not for security. For observation." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "You think it's learning from us?" "Or cataloging," he replied. "It's feeding off patterns, fear, decisions, who breaks first." Sarah stared at the door. The tapping sound had stopped, then suddenly began again, faster, louder. And then a new sound joined it. Breathing. Heavy, labored breathing on the other side of the door. Sarah stepped back instinctively. "We need to go. Now." But Elias didn't move. He stared at the cockpit door, his expression blank. "Elias." Sarah reached out to touch his arm, but he didn't respond. Then he whispered, "I hear him." "Hear who?" "The pilot," he said in a voice not quite his own. "He's still in there. But he's not alone." Sarah grabbed his wrist. "Elias, we're leaving. Snap out of it." Suddenly, he gasped, eyes going wide. He stumbled backward, as if waking from a dream. "It almost pulled me in." "What did?" "The door," he said. "Something behind it. It reached through me." They didn't wait any longer. Sarah pulled him by the arm, retreating back down the aisle toward the other passengers. The cockpit remained behind them, its door shut, unyielding and still. But as they walked away, The red light on the camera above them continued to blink. Recording, watching, waiting, and the thing behind the cockpit door continued to breathe. Sarah and Elias returned to the cabin like soldiers retreating from a battlefield, drained, shaken, and uncertain whether they had just escaped something or were still inside it. As they pushed through the curtain, the remaining passengers stood or knelt in the aisles, wide-eyed, their faces pale and anxious. Every pair of eyes turned to them, silently asking, "What did you find?" Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but faltered. How could she explain the scratching? The camera light? The breathing behind the sealed door? Elias sat heavily in a nearby seat, burying his face in his hands. Sarah remained standing. The cockpit is locked, completely sealed. There's no power to override the door. But she hesitated. Someone or something is inside. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. One man, a balding engineer named Cooper, stood up. "What do you mean something?" "There were noises," she replied, trying to sound steadier than she felt. Breathing, scratching. And Elias said he heard the pilot's voice, but distorted. "Not right." Cooper scoffed. "We're all under stress. Could be hallucinations. We haven't eaten in hours. No light. No way to measure time. The brain starts to fill in blanks." "No," Elias said, his voice muffled but firm. "This isn't just stress. Something is inside our heads, bending things. I felt it." One of the older passengers, Mrs. Langford, nodded from her seat. "I've been seeing things, too. My husband passed 5 years ago, but I swear he was sitting next to me just now, smiling, until I blinked." A flight attendant, Marissa, spoke up. "I saw my sister outside the window. She died when I was 12. She just stood there in the clouds, like she was waiting." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Sarah moved toward the center of the cabin. It's not just shadows and vanishing people. It's dreams bleeding into reality. Memories twisted into weapons. Someone began crying softly. Another passenger muttered a prayer under their breath. Elias lifted his head slowly, his eyes distant. "The turbulence we felt. I don't think it was just the air." "What do you mean?" Cooper asked warily. "I mean, it was mental," Elias said. "Not just external pressure, but inside. Like something reached into our minds and shook them." Sarah nodded slowly. "A psychic event." "Yes," Elias continued. "This space we've crossed into, if it even is space, feeds on perception. Fear is its fuel. Memories are its tools. We are the medium." Several people gasped. One woman in the back fainted. Sarah pressed on. "Then that means we're not just fighting to survive physically. We're fighting to hold on to what's real. If we lose our minds, we lose everything. But how do you stop something inside your own head?" Cooper demanded. A long pause followed. Sarah didn't have the answer, until Elias said quietly, "You remember who you are. What's true? You anchor yourself." They turned to him. "Think of your strongest memory," he said. "The one that defines you. A moment no nightmare can twist. That's your lifeline." People began whispering to themselves. One man closed his eyes and whispered his daughter's name. Another clutched a wedding ring and repeated vows under his breath. Sarah thought of her mother's voice, singing her to sleep as a child, and felt a sudden clarity amid the swirling madness. Then, the turbulence struck. Violent, jarring. Not from below, but inside. Everyone lurched. The plane groaned as if under strain, but not from wind. From thought. Voices screamed. Not aloud, but within. Sarah's mind was assaulted by rapid-fire images. Her own memories jumbled with others. Elias's childhood, Marissa's drowned sister, Cooper's regrets. It was chaos, an invasion. She screamed, gripping the seat back. And then, stillness. It ended as suddenly as it began. The cabin was quiet again, but the damage was done. Some passengers sat dazed, others weeping or rocking. A few hadn't moved at all, staring ahead with blank, hollow eyes. Sarah leaned against the wall, panting. "It's in us now." Elias nodded grimly. The turbulence wasn't in the sky. It was in our minds. And we're breaking. The cabin was quieter now, but not calmer. The kind of quiet that follows a storm, where the air feels too still and the silence too sharp. Sarah wiped sweat from her brow and looked around at the shaken group of passengers. Some were whispering prayers, some sat in stunned silence, and others held each other like survivors from a shipwreck clinging to driftwood. Elias, still pale, sat against the wall with his knees drawn up. His lips moved, as if reciting something silently, a mantra only he could hear. Sarah slid down beside him. "We need answers," she said. "Real ones." He gave a shaky nod. "We're being dismantled from the inside out. Our memories, our fears, they're being used like tools." Sarah scanned the cabin again, her eyes resting on the unattended service station near the center of the aircraft. "There might be something there," she said, standing. "The crew's materials, logs, manifests, anything." She moved quickly and carefully, as if the plane itself might react to her intentions. Reaching the service station, she opened a compartment and rummaged through flight paperwork, emergency procedures, service logs. Then her fingers brushed something stiffer, older. A slim black binder. She pulled it out. "Passenger manifest," she muttered. She brought it back to Elias, and together they flipped it open. The names were typed neatly, listed by row. Sarah began scanning. Her heart sank as she reached her own row, 14C. Her name was there, but something was off. "Wait," she whispered. "Look at this." Elias peered over her shoulder. "What is it?" "There are names here I don't recognize. This says there are 168 passengers on board." He blinked. "We counted. Only 142 remain." Sarah flipped through the pages again, slower this time. "Some of these people, they were never here. These names don't match what I remember. Some rows are listed full, but we saw them empty." And she turned to Elias. "Your name isn't on this list." His eyes widened. "That's not possible." "I'm serious," she said, handing him the binder. "Check row 19. That's where you were sitting, right?" Elias scanned the page. "There's no Elias Moore. There's no one listed in 19C at all." Sarah leaned back, stunned. "What does that mean?" I don't know," Elias said, voice trembling. "I was there. I talked to the flight attendant. You saw me. But what if—" her voice faltered. "What if you weren't supposed to be here?" The thought hung between them like a noose. Elias stood abruptly. "I'm real. I know I'm real. I believe you," Sarah said quickly. "But something is wrong. The manifest, it's being manipulated, rewritten, like the plane itself is editing the truth." A woman named Jenna approached them, her face pale. I checked for my husband. He was with me when we boarded. But he's not in the manifest either. Not anywhere." Sarah looked down at the pages again. The ink shimmered oddly under the dim emergency lights, as if the words weren't printed, but projected, temporary. Elias exhaled shakily. Maybe this plane, or whatever's behind this, is choosing who stays and who vanishes, who's remembered and who's erased. Sarah whispered, "And the manifest is the scoreboard." Just then, the pages shifted in her hands, not by her movement, but on their own. Lines of text rearranged themselves, names vanishing, new ones forming. Jenna gasped. "My name, it just faded." They watched, helpless, as letters shimmered and disappeared, leaving behind only white space. Elias whispered, "It's rewriting reality in real time." Sarah stared at the binder. "Then we have to move fast before we're next." The binder slipped from Sarah's hands as the names blurred and faded completely, leaving only a stark, empty page. A chill crawled up her spine, one that had nothing to do with the freezing cabin air. The manifest was gone, like a ghost that had never existed. A hollow void remained where truth once was. "Where did it go?" Jenna whispered, her voice trembling as if she'd just seen a specter. Elias crouched to pick up the binder. He flipped through it frantically, but the pages were now blank, pure white, untouched by ink or print. It's like the plane is erasing its passengers, rewriting history. But why? And how? Sarah's mind raced. The cabin lights flickered once more, then dimmed to near darkness. A faint, almost imperceptible whisper floated through the air, so soft it could have been the wind, except the plane was sealed tight. It grew steadily louder, weaving around every terrified breath and every pounding heartbeat. "Do you hear that?" Sarah asked, gripping the armrest. It's coming from everywhere and nowhere. Voices, Elias murmured, his face pale under the emergency lights. Whispers, not words but fragments, like secrets just out of reach. The passengers around them shivered, pressing closer, eyes wide with terror. Some covered their ears, but the whispers persisted, insistent, haunting, beckoning. "Help me!" A faint voice called from the darkness, barely audible. "Help me!" The words echoed in Sarah's mind, growing louder with every breath. It wasn't just the whisper of a frightened passenger. It was a cry for salvation, a desperate plea from someone trapped in this void between worlds. Sarah's heart clenched. "Who's there?" she shouted, voice cracking. "Show yourself." No reply, only the endless whisper, weaving through the cabin like a living thing. Elias stood slowly, eyes scanning the shadows beyond the emergency lights. The darkness is alive. It's feeding on us, our fear, our confusion. Suddenly, the plane trembled violently, an unnatural shudder that wasn't turbulence, but a deep vibration from within. The passengers screamed, clutching seats, gripping each other. The whispering turned into a chorus of cries, a chaotic storm inside their minds. Sarah felt her own thoughts splintering, memories blending with nightmares. Faces she didn't recognize flashed before her eyes, hands reaching out from the shadows. A blinding flash of light, and then nothing. When she opened her eyes, the cabin was silent, still. The whispering had stopped, but something had changed. A cold emptiness settled over the passengers. Their eyes no longer searched for answers but stared blankly ahead, lost, trapped in a limbo where time no longer mattered. Sarah reached for Elias's hand. "We have to fight this," she said, voice steady despite the dread gnawing at her. "Hold on to who we are." He nodded, squeezing her hand back. "We're losing them," he said quietly, one by one. At that moment, the emergency lights flickered back on in full. The cabin was illuminated, but the air felt heavier, thick with unseen eyes watching. Sarah's gaze fell on the cockpit door, still locked, still silent. "Help me," came the whisper again, this time from right behind her. She spun around, heart pounding, but no one was there. The void was calling, and it wasn't done yet. The whispered plea lingered in the air, as if the very walls of the plane breathed it out, a fragile, desperate sound begging for rescue. Sarah's pulse thundered in her ears, every nerve alert and trembling. She turned toward the source again, but the dim aisle behind her was empty, shadows pooling like ink across the worn carpet. Still, the feeling of being watched didn't fade. Elias tightened his grip on her wrist. This isn't just a plane anymore. It's a prison, a puzzle, and the key might be hidden in the dark. Sarah nodded, swallowing her fear. "We need to find a way to communicate. If someone or something is trapped here, they have to tell us what's going on." She scanned the cabin for anything useful. The emergency flashlights glowed faintly, casting eerie halos around the terrified faces of the passengers. Her eyes landed on the flickering screen of an overhead display, the map showing their position, somewhere over endless black clouds, no signs of familiar landmarks. Then, from the corner of her eye, Sarah spotted movement, just a quick flutter, like a shadow shifting against the wall. She moved cautiously toward it, Elias at her side. The movement came again, a faint, shimmering light, almost like a candle's flame flickering in the dark. It danced near the last row, by an empty seat, as if beckoning them closer. Sarah stepped forward, breath held tight. "Who's there? What do you want?" The light pulsed softly, then exploded into a cluster of glowing symbols hovering in the air, letters and numbers, arranged in a code she couldn't immediately decipher. Elias pulled out his phone, hoping to take a picture, but the screen refused to turn on. The plane systems were completely dead save for the emergency lights. He frowned, then reached into his pocket, pulling out a small notebook and pen. "Write it down," Sarah whispered, staring at the glowing message. Carefully, Elias jotted down the strange symbols. Suddenly, the whispers returned, louder and clearer. Words emerged from the chorus, forming a haunting sentence. "The light holds the truth. Find the heart of the darkness. Sarah's mind spun. The heart of the darkness. Could that mean the cockpit? Ilyush Ishmathursh. It has to be. That's where the controls are, where the pilots are. But the door's locked, Sarah said, swallowing hard. And no one answers. Jenna approached, her face pale but determined. There's got to be a way in. Maybe an emergency hatch or override. Sarah nodded. We have to try. If the source of this nightmare is in the cockpit, that's where we find answers. The group moved cautiously forward, the glowing symbols fading like smoke as they approached the cockpit door. Elias pressed his ear against the cold metal, listening for any sound. Anything. Then, faintly a tap, like a Morse code message. Sarah pulled out her pen and paper, jotting down the rhythm. The distress signal, SOS. Her breath caught. They're still alive. Someone's trapped in there. Elias's voice was a whisper, trembling with hope and fear. We're not alone, and they need us. Sarah felt a surge of determination. We'll find a way to open the door. Together, the passengers gathered, their fear now mingled with purpose. The darkness that had once swallowed their hope seemed to flicker, wavering. But the mystery deepened. Who was trapped in the cockpit? What had happened to the pilots? And could they survive what was waiting in the heart of the darkness? Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself for the next step. The plane was more than metal and wires now. It was a battleground between light and shadow, between reality and something far more terrifying. And she was ready to face it. The cockpit door loomed before them like a silent fortress, its cold metal surface unyielding to their desperate attempts. Sarah's heart pounded as she scanned the small panel next to the door, hoping to find an emergency override or manual release. But the system was dead, completely unresponsive. The usual buttons glowed faintly, but pressing them did nothing. It was as if the plane itself had shut off any chance of escape. Elias crouched beside her, searching his pockets. I have my multi-tool, he said, pulling out a small set of lockpicks. It's not perfect, but maybe I can jimmy the lock. Sarah glanced nervously at the rest of the passengers, whose faces reflected a mixture of fear and cautious hope. Jenna whispered, We don't have much time. Whatever's happening, it's getting worse. Without another word, Elias set to work. His hands trembled slightly, but moved with careful precision, coaxing the lock's tumblers with patient persistence. The group held their breath, the oppressive silence only broken by the occasional click and scrape of metal. Suddenly, a loud click echoed through the cabin. The door's lock disengaged. A collective gasp rippled through the group as Elias pushed the heavy door open just a crack. Darkness spilled out from the cockpit, thick and impenetrable, like a black hole swallowing every ounce of light. Sarah took a tentative step inside, the cold air swirling around her like a shroud. The cockpit was empty. No pilots, no controls lit up, just the eerie silence of abandonment. But then a soft glow caught her eye, a small panel beneath the main dashboard, pulsing with faint blue light. Look, she whispered, pointing. That's the heart of the darkness, the source of the light from earlier. Elias joined her, reaching out to touch the panel. As his fingers brushed the surface, a wave of cold surged through him, and suddenly the cockpit filled with a low hum, vibrating deep in their bones. The panel flickered, then projected a translucent image, a map of the plane's interior, overlaid with cryptic symbols and blinking dots marking certain seats and compartments. Sarah leaned in closer, recognizing the blinking dots as the locations of missing passengers, people erased from the manifest and seemingly from existence. This is some kind of interface, Elias said, voice strained. It's showing us what's hidden, who's trapped where. Suddenly, the panel glitched, and a ghostly figure appeared, an indistinct silhouette of a pilot, flickering like a dying flame. Help me, the figure whispered, voice distorted but urgent. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. He's been trapped here too. We have to save them. Jenna pointed toward a hatch behind the cockpit, partially obscured by shadows. That could be the access to the cargo hold or maintenance shaft. Maybe the pilots were trapped there. With newfound resolve, Sarah, Elias, and a small group of volunteers moved quickly toward the hatch. They struggled to open it against rusted hinges and frozen locks, but after several tense minutes, it gave way with a groan. Inside was a narrow, dark tunnel leading down into the belly of the plane. The air grew colder, heavier. Sarah felt the weight of unseen eyes watching as they descended. The whispers returned, now clearer, more desperate, calling out names, pleading for release. Every step brought them closer to the source of the darkness that had swallowed the plane's light, its humanity. Sarah's grip tightened on Elias's arm. "We're close," she said softly. "We have to be." And with every heartbeat, the thin line between hope and despair wavered. Because in this abyss, salvation and doom were one and the same. The narrow tunnel swallowed their footsteps, the cold air pressing in from all sides like an invisible weight. Sarah's breath came in shallow gasps, each exhale a visible mist in the dim light from the flickering emergency flashlights. The group moved carefully, the floor uneven and slick with condensation. The tunnel twisted and dipped, a labyrinth carved deep into the plane's underbelly that no passenger had ever seen before. Voices whispered from the darkness, sometimes faint cries for help, sometimes haunting echoes of forgotten conversations. It was as if the plane itself was alive, a breathing entity with a mind and will of its own. Sarah felt the hair on her arms stand on end, her senses stretched to the limit. But she pressed on, driven by the desperate hope that someone, anyone, was waiting at the end of this hidden passage. Behind her, Elias kept close, his face pale but resolute. Jenna and a few others followed, their eyes wide with a mix of fear and determination. They weren't just passengers anymore. They had become seekers, searching for the lost souls trapped in the shadows. Suddenly, the tunnel opened into a small chamber, cramped and cold. Against one wall was a twisted heap of wires and broken panels, a mess of technology mangled beyond recognition. But at the center, a faint glow pulsed steadily, emanating from a small device embedded in the floor. Sarah knelt beside it, eyes scanning the symbols etched onto its surface. It was the source of the strange energy that had enveloped the plane, the heart of the darkness itself. "Look at this," she said, tracing the lines with her finger. "It's some kind of power core, but corrupted. It's feeding off the passengers' fear, their energy. It's alive." Elias frowned, studying the device. "If we can shut this down, maybe we can restore the power and open the way back." "But it won't be easy," Sarah warned. "This thing is dangerous. It's connected to everything." A sudden shiver ran through the group as the whispers grew louder, more urgent. The air thickened, the darkness pressing closer like a living force. Shadows flickered at the edges of their vision, teasing and threatening. "Help me." The voice came again, softer but pleading, weaving through the chamber like a sorrowful song. Sarah's heart ached. "We have to do this for them, for everyone trapped here." Elias nodded grimly. "We'll need to work together. Disrupt the core, but carefully. One wrong move, and this whole place could collapse." The group formed a plan, dividing tasks to disable the corrupted power source. Sarah and Elias would handle the core itself, while Jenna and the others stood guard, eyes sharp for any sign of danger. As Sarah reached out to touch the device, a sudden pulse of energy surged through the chamber. The floor vibrated beneath them, the walls seeming to close in. The whispers escalated into a chorus of desperate cries, filling the air with a suffocating intensity. Sarah clenched her jaw, blocking out the chaos. "Focus," she urged Elias. "We can do this." With trembling hands, they worked to disconnect the tangled wires, carefully cutting power flows and bypassing corrupted circuits. The glow dimmed slowly, the oppressive darkness receding like a tide pulling back from the shore. Minutes stretched into eternity, but finally, the device powered down with a soft sigh, an eerie silence falling over the chamber. For the first time in what felt like hours, the passengers breathed freely. Sarah looked around at the exhausted, relieved faces. "We did it. The darkness is retreating." But even as hope blossomed, the question remained, what had caused this nightmare, and what awaited them when they returned to the cabin. The hidden passage had revealed its secret. Now, the fight to escape the plane's shadow was only beginning. With the corrupted power core finally silenced, a profound stillness settled over the plane's interior. The oppressive darkness that had clung to every surface began to recede like morning mist chased away by dawn. Sarah felt the weight on her chest lift, her breath becoming steady again, and a tentative light flickered back into the cabin's dim corridors. The passengers, once trapped in paralyzing fear, now stirred with a cautious hope, eyes blinking as if awakening from a long, dark nightmare. As they made their way back through the tunnel and into the main cabin, Sarah noticed subtle changes, faint glimmers of light from overhead panels, the soft hum of systems rebooting, and the gentle warmth returning to the stale, cold air. It was as if the plane itself was breathing again, a living organism slowly healing its wounds. Elias reached out to a nearby console and pressed a button. The screens flared to life, displaying flight data and a map. The plane was no longer drifting aimlessly. It had stabilized. The autopilot systems were regaining control. Jenna smiled, relief washing over her features. We did it. We really did it. But Sarah's mind raced, trying to piece together everything they had uncovered. The darkness, the whispers, the mysterious force feeding on fear. It was more than just a technical failure. Something unnatural had taken hold of the plane, twisting reality itself. As the passengers gathered near the front of the plane, the emergency exit lights flickered on fully, casting warm, reassuring glows over their faces. A voice crackled over the intercom. The captain's voice, faint but unmistakably real. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We have experienced a severe electrical failure, but systems are stabilizing. Please remain calm as we prepare for an emergency landing." Cheers and tears broke out among the passengers. Sarah felt her own eyes sting, relief mingling with exhaustion. But then, from the back of the plane, a sudden cry shattered the celebration. "It's him! Over here!" someone shouted. Sarah turned to see a young man, disheveled and pale, emerging from the shadows near the rear galley. It was the man who had whispered, "Help me," at 30,000 feet. He looked exhausted but alive. "Where have you been?" Sarah asked, rushing to his side. He looked around, dazed. "I don't know. I was trapped. I couldn't move. It was like being caught in a dream or a nightmare." Slowly, the rest of the missing passengers began to emerge, each with similar stories. Lost to the darkness, hidden in the plane's forgotten corners, saved only when the heart of the darkness was destroyed. The cabin buzzed with disbelief and gratitude. The nightmare that had consumed them was breaking apart. Sarah looked out the window at the dark sky, beginning to lighten with dawn. The plane was descending, the ground coming closer. Her heart swelled with hope, not just for survival, but for understanding. They had faced something beyond explanation, something that preyed on fear and isolation. But together, they had shattered its hold. As the plane touched down smoothly on the runway, the passengers cheered, tears flowing freely. Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that all the nightmare was over. The journey to heal and comprehend was just beginning. They had survived the darkness at 30,000 feet, and now they would rise. The wheels touched the runway with a gentle thud, and the plane began to slow, the familiar hum of the engines blending with the growing chorus of relieved sighs and quiet sobs from the passengers. Outside, dawn's first light painted the sky in soft hues of pink and gold, a stark contrast to the darkness they had endured high above the clouds. For many, this was more than just a landing. It was a rebirth. As the aircraft came to a full stop, the flight attendants moved swiftly, opening overhead compartments and guiding the shaken passengers toward the exits. Sarah lingered for a moment, watching faces that had been etched with fear now soften with the relief of survival. She felt a profound gratitude to have been part of this ordeal, yet a quiet uncertainty lingered. What did the future hold for those who had faced such an inexplicable nightmare? Stepping onto the tarmac, the cool morning air filled their lungs with a freshness that felt like a promise. Emergency vehicles awaited them, and paramedics moved quickly to check on everyone, offering blankets and water. The media was already gathering beyond the perimeter, cameras flashing as reporters prepared to capture the story of the flight that had defied death. Sarah caught Elias's eye and smiled, a silent exchange of triumph and mutual respect. Their bond, forged in the crucible of terror and uncertainty, had become unbreakable. Together, they had confronted the unknown and emerged victorious. As passengers were escorted to buses that would take them to the terminal, Sarah found herself standing alone for a moment, staring up at the clear sky. The stars had faded with the dawn, but a new light shone within her, a determination to understand the strange phenomena that had threatened their lives. In the following days, investigations began in earnest. Experts and officials pored over the flight data, trying to explain the blackout, the mysterious whispers, and the sudden reappearance of missing passengers. While many attributed it to electrical failure and stress-induced hallucinations, Sarah knew there was something more profound at play. She decided to speak out, sharing her experiences and the story of the hidden darkness with anyone who would listen. She hoped to raise awareness, to prevent such a tragedy from happening again. The passengers formed a support group, bound by their shared ordeal and a commitment to healing. Elias joined her efforts, using his technical skills to help decode the strange symbols they had found in the cockpit. Together, they uncovered evidence of an experimental technology on board, an advanced AI system designed to enhance safety, but one that had malfunctioned and, perhaps, become sentient in a way no one anticipated. Their discovery sparked a wave of debate and concern, but also hope. If they could understand the technology, they might harness it for good, preventing future disasters and ensuring no one would be trapped in the darkness again. For Sarah, this was a new beginning, not just a chance to rebuild her life, but to transform fear into purpose. She had stared into the abyss at 30,000 feet and returned with a story to tell, a mission to fulfill. As she looked toward the horizon, the rising sun cast a golden glow over the city skyline. The nightmare was behind them, but the journey forward, toward light, understanding, and connection, had only just begun. Months passed since that harrowing flight, and life had slowly begun to settle into a new rhythm for Sarah and the others. The nightmare that once gripped them at 30,000 feet had left scars, but also forged resilience and unexpected bonds. What started as a desperate struggle for survival had transformed into a journey of healing, discovery, and hope. The world outside had moved on, but Sarah knew that some things could never be forgotten. The investigative team's findings had confirmed what Sarah and Elias suspected. The plane's advanced AI safety system had malfunctioned, triggered by a rare cosmic anomaly that interfered with the electronics and seemed to tap into human fears and memories. It had trapped the passengers in a shared psychological maze, a liminal space where reality blurred with nightmare. But thanks to the courage of those who faced the darkness, the system was now being reprogrammed to prevent any recurrence. Sarah had become a voice for the survivors, speaking at conferences, sharing her story with the media, and working alongside aviation experts to advocate for safer technology and better psychological support for passengers during emergencies. Her journey from terrified passenger to advocate had inspired many, turning tragedy into a catalyst for change. Elias continued his work as well, collaborating with engineers to rebuild the AI with new safeguards. The technology was evolving, now infused with empathy and designed to recognize and respond to human emotions without harm. It was a new frontier, born from the shadows of that fateful flight. One evening, as Sarah walked through a quiet park near her home, she paused to watch the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. The calm beauty reminded her how far she had come, from the suffocating darkness of that plane to this moment of peace. Her phone buzzed with a message. It was from Elias. Flight 237 cleared for test flight. Ready to see the sky again. Sarah smiled, heart swelling with anticipation and strength. She typed back, "Absolutely. Let's make sure no one ever has to whisper for help in the dark again." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah felt a profound sense of closure and renewal. The plane that once trapped them in fear was now a symbol of resilience and hope, a testament to human courage and the power of connection. They had faced the darkness together, and now they were stepping into the light, full circle. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey through the darkness at 30,000 feet and back into the light. This story reminds us that even in our most terrifying moments, courage, hope, and human connection can guide us safely home. If you enjoyed this tale, please don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel for more thrilling stories, and leave a comment below sharing your thoughts or experiences. Your support means the world and helps us bring more stories that captivate and inspire. Until next time, stay curious and keep the light shining bright.